No, when it
So
comes to, I mean, when it comes to Europe, where does mass immigration have a place in all of this? I mean, does it have a considerable effect on this? Because definitely it seems like it does. But then how do you view all of it? Of course, I mean, like we can argue places like in Nepal, I mean, like, is mass immigration the cause or not? Because that's definitely is not the case. But when it comes to Europe, and one of the pointers or one of the variables that people are pointing towards for the rise in housing crisis is also mass immigrations, right? So, where do you see this happening? How do you see
immigration.
Yeah.
It's causing like what critical about this circumstances. It's causing a social split between like maybe ideology or something. There is a between cultures or something, and there is actually a split.
Yeah.
That friend who came from UK was telling like he lived in a pretty nice area, but he faced so much of racial discrimination. He actually moved out from that place and was, or now he is like confined to a very closed foreigner-friendly locality.
Well, let me say just for Britain, because I don't know the details so much in the other parts of Europe. But in Britain, the problems are of mass immigration are not, I mean, the problems we face are not the result of mass immigration. I mean, people are worried about the National Health Service, and we have now 7 million people waiting for operations, which we never had before. I mean, people, housing.
What do you mean? What do you mean by waiting?
17 million people.
Waiting like they have to wait in a line?
7 million people are waiting up to 18 months for routine elective, like hip operations and so on and so forth.
Wow.
Yeah, wow. Housing is a disaster.
Sorry to disturb. For 18 months, what would those guys do? They have to live with it?
Not get their hips replaced.
They have to live with it.
Appendicitis.
Yeah, of course.
No, acute.
Not in critical.
No, it's not. Accidents and emergencies
Yeah.
survives just about. My son is a cardiologist, heart specialist. His wife is a radiologist. They work in a hospital in the town where I live. They are under pressure all the time, huge pressure. Accidents and emergency is really under pressure. They don't have enough beds for the people and so on and so forth. And they can't move people out of beds because the social care system is collapsing. None of this has to do with mass immigration. On the contrary, the vast majority of doctors and nurses and cleaners in the National Health Service are immigrants. The same is true in housing. You know, people in Britain are very concerned they don't get a house, and it's all immigrants. The reality of the matter is that most immigrants are in rented accommodation and crowded places and so on. And the lack of housing is because governments have failed to invest in housing. They've sold off all the social council housing, social housing, and so on. Mrs. Thatcher introduced that back in 1979. Right to buy. So people who had been provided with social housing by the council because they weren't well off enough and they rented it, that they were then able to buy. So it was for aspiring people to sell, so they could buy that house. So that disappeared from social housing. And there has been no housing built since really the 80s. So we have a catastrophic failure of investment in the health service, failure of investment, if you like, in other services. To my mind, this has nothing to do with mass immigration. That is an excuse for all sorts of, what you say, divisions and angers and so on and so forth. The crisis is about lack of investment. And the lack of investment, in my view, it's a very particular view, is because we have now moved away from the traditional industrial capitalism where you invest in people, you raise wages, then they buy your goods and so on. And capital is more interested in financial rewards and so on. And governments have not found they are able to raise sufficient taxes, because every government that comes in says, no, we'll cut your taxes, we'll cut your taxes. Yeah. Profits have been increasing throughout these last 20, 30 years, but it's gone to shareholders and owners of capital, and it has not been reinvested back. So this is why our present government, which is the Labour government, she is the leader of the Conservative Party, the Labour government faces a real crisis. We have an autumn budget coming up, and there isn't enough money. I mean, we could print more, but they say they won't do that.
You can send it to someone else, but you don't. No. You yourself don't have enough money, but you can send it to someone else. Basically talking. right?
Yeah.
It's what's happening.
But it's all going to certain people and not elsewhere. So there's a lack of investment in roads, every part of, this is Britain, and it's not untypical. Similar things are happening in Italy and France. Germany has deindustrialized, it has really serious problems.
Yeah.
So my sense is that there's increasing accumulation of capital, it's increasingly in few hands, and the majority of people are suffering as a result. And governments have lacked the courage, if you like, or the intelligence to raise taxes strategically so they have more revenue to invest. There's more of a privatization of the health, privatization of housing, privatization of all the basic services. Electricity, it's owned by about 4 major energy companies. So I have no choice over what I pay for my electricity or what have you. It's a cartel. So, and I think I can't generalize to the rest of Europe, but my sense is certainly in Germany, similar things are happening. So for the majority of people, life looks as though it's worse. Their public services are declining. Their incomes are not increasing in pace. And so they're struggling and they're going to food banks, and that anger is very largely at the moment being directed towards immigrants. But those immigrants, as I say, many of them are working on the public transport, in health services and social care. Very few places where look after elderly people are British nurses. They're almost all from overseas. Yeah. And they're poorly paid. So it's a crisis. It is a crisis of Western capitalism. Full stop. I mean, and Marx said this. I mean, Arrighi said it, but actually long before that, Karl Marx said, it's the accumulation of capital into finance capital, it becomes a bubble. It's the source of real crisis. He kind of saw that a long time ago. Marx is obviously not the Bible. It's not something you take literally, but there are indications that we have a system that is no longer working. But in parts of Asia, with very different political structures, as in China, there is a capacity to maneuver, to plan, to judge. In what was the Soviet Union and Russia, there is a continuing, I think, ability to plan strategically, to take control. So capital accumulates, but this private accumulation, which is the Western model, is proving to be devastating, in my view.
Socially devastating, which leads to social unrest, social polarization. Yes. I mean, what shocks me about the United States, having lived there, having studied there, I mean, I don't recognize the United States that I was there in the 80s,
No, it's
in the 80s. It's so polarized. I mean, this was, almost like when I was, again, in the Soviet Union studying engineering, those last, before I came back 10 years before Soviet system collapsed. But already the indications were there. It was a very polarized society. You're either part of the nomenclatura, as they said, the establishment, and you were beneficiary from that kind of system, or you were outside, and that polarized there. Now, this is, again, I tie back to Nepal and the Gen Z kind of a revolt. Most of the Gen Z people, I mean, they have parents and others who've been struggling very hard and not been able to meet basic this thing. Barely they have managed to get these guys educated and all, and they see no prospect, And it's not easy always to find jobs outside. So there was that, brewing revolt. And let me give you one figure in Nepal, coming back to it. Somebody had done this, and I think came out of the World Bank documents. Somebody who, I think it was Radha Susar who first put it out to me. They took the figures, the last 10 years of the panchayat, the 10 years of multi-party rule, and this last 10 years of this Loktantra with the Maoist and all that. What is interesting is if you look at the panchayat, the last 10 years of panchayat, it was already declining. Panchayat was already getting corrupt. It was on its way out and all. But even then, if you looked at the budget, you had, 67% of the budget was spent on development, making roads, hospital, whatever. 17% was spent on administration cost. If you look at the figure now, these 10 years, 17%, 17 is spent on development, and near about 69 or whatever percent is spent in administrative cost, which basically means political thugs hired into government positions getting salaries. Okay. Other figure, the last 10 years of Panchayat, average tax across Nepal was 8.5%. Right now it's 20.
Yeah.
And comparatively right now, India and Bangladesh are around 10, 11.
Really?
So we have a similar situation here, which explains the Gen Z kind of frustration, revolt, coming from the underlying structural imbalances that you just talked about. I think that's what's really critical.
No, I think that's right. And I mean, from very little I know, my sort of anecdotal evidence of 3 people young in early 20s who work in the hotel that I'm staying in, they are typically Gen Z people. Yeah, they have 16,000 rupees, I think, a month they earn, which is sort of okay, but not very much.
Barely enough.
Can't really send money home. Their parents, as you say, have struggled to get them a sort of education. They aspire to college, but it's not possible. They don't have the money. They would like to go abroad, but they are finding it very difficult because you have to pay up front or to get a visa and to go abroad. The young woman who is one of the people I'm talking to is now applying to Croatia, to go to Croatia, which is bizarre. Yeah. So and all 3 of these were very aware of what was going on. 2 of them actually went to the protests at Maitigar and has shown me the pictures of the people protesting. So they're absolutely classical. All 3 are living away from home. So not with their families, so nobody's controlling them. So they could go out on the streets and demonstrate and so on. So I think there's a particular social characteristic that's worth mapping out of the people who were involved and how they relate to the wider problems. You're right. This everybody is thinking about how do we explain what's going on, but there is as you say, a rupture which it's been coming a long time. Yeah. No one could say exactly when it would happen and what form it would take. And I'm very struck by the fact that this is not just in Nepal. I mean, the young people everywhere are finding it, as you say, an increasing struggle in the way that their parents didn't. Their parents were okay. If they struggled, they managed to buy a house or they could find somewhere or got a job. There's a generation that really, unless they're part of the privileged nomenclatura or
party aristocracy,
if you're not part of that, then you are really struggling, and there is no clear way forward. So people want a political reform, and what is actually needed is a social and economic reform, but that takes much longer.